Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. It started one evening when the house felt strangely quiet, the kind of silence that makes every little sound echo in your chest. I remember standing in the kitchen, washing dishes, when I caught myself thinking about how much had changed in my life over the years. Divorce had left me feeling like pieces of myself were missing, and even though I tried to hold everything together, loneliness found its way into my heart. That's when he entered the picture, my grown stepson, a young man who had recently moved back home. He was 22, confident, and carried himself with a warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time. At first, it felt innocent. We would share small conversations, late-night talks about work, life, and the kind of dreams people only share when they feel safe. He was someone who listened, really listened, in a way that made me forget the weight I'd been carrying. And the more time we spent together, the more blurred the lines became. I knew the relationship between us was supposed to stay within certain boundaries, but there was an undeniable pull, something magnetic and impossible to ignore. It's strange how temptation doesn't come crashing into your life all at once. Instead, it creeps in slowly, through laughter at the dinner table, through the lingering glances when no one else is watching, through the way he remembered little details about me that no one else seemed to notice. I caught myself looking forward to his company, and when he smiled, it felt like a spark lit up a part of me that had been asleep for years. I told myself it was nothing, just harmless affection, but deep down I knew it was more. One night, everything shifted. We were sitting on the couch, a movie playing in the background, but neither of us was paying attention. The air felt different, charged, heavy, as if the universe itself was waiting for us to make a choice. Our conversation fell into silence, and in that quiet moment, I realized we had stepped into dangerous territory. His eyes lingered on mine a little too long, and my heart raced in a way I hadn't felt in ages. The line that was meant to separate us started to blur, and I knew crossing it would change everything. And that's where the story truly begins. A choice made in a single moment can alter the course of an entire life. But was it worth it? Was it love that was blossoming in a forbidden place, or was it simply loneliness playing tricks on the heart? These are the questions that haunted me, questions I want you to think about as you listen to this story. After that night on the couch, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at me. It wasn't just a casual glance, it carried a weight, a question neither of us dared to ask out loud. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into it, but every small moment that followed seemed to add fuel to the fire building quietly between us. It was in the way he lingered in the kitchen just a little longer when I was there, or how he'd brush past me with a touch that felt more intentional than accidental. To understand how things reached that point, you have to know the space we were living in. After my divorce, the house had felt empty, like a hollow shell of what it once was. My ex-husband was gone, and the quietness at night was something I never quite got used to. When my stepson came back home, the atmosphere shifted. The house was alive again. He brought energy, laughter, and the kind of companionship that filled the silence I had grown to fear. He would ask me how my day was, and actually listen to the answer, something I hadn't felt in years. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to ignore the closeness that was forming. We cooked meals side by side, cleaned up after each other, and even shared stories late into the night. Those conversations became something I looked forward to more than anything. He was mature for his age, thoughtful, and there was a sensitivity in him that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't for so long. It was easy to forget the roles we were supposed to play. It was easy to just exist in the warmth of the moment. Yet, underneath it all, there was always this unspoken tension. I knew the line existed, and I reminded myself constantly that crossing it would be a mistake. Still, whenever he looked at me, I felt a pull that was stronger than reason. It was like being caught between two worlds, one where I kept everything safe and untouched, and another where I surrendered to something that terrified me just as much as it excited me. There were nights when I would lie awake replaying our interactions in my head. The way his hand brushed mine when we passed a dish at dinner, the way he leaned in when I spoke as though my words carried some secret importance, the way he would smile at me like he knew something I didn't. All those moments piled up until I couldn't deny the truth anymore. Something was happening between us, whether we admitted it or not. But I couldn't help asking myself, was this real? Or was I just lonely enough to see more than what was actually there? Maybe he was only being kind, only filling a space in my life that I was desperate to mend. Or maybe he felt it too, the same undeniable pull that was slowly drawing us together no matter how much we tried to resist. Every time I thought about pulling away, something else would happen to draw me back in. A late-night coffee on the porch. A quiet walk through the neighborhood. A simple laugh we shared that felt like it belonged only to us. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was connection. And yet, the closer we got, the more dangerous it felt. That was the conflict I couldn't escape. I was standing at the edge of a choice I knew could change everything. But instead of turning back, I kept inching closer, step by step, moment by moment, waiting for the one thing that would finally tip us over the edge. And deep down, I think he was waiting too. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope. Every interaction with him carried an invisible weight, like we were both aware of something unspoken, but pretending not to see it. At breakfast, the simplest conversations about coffee or errands felt layered with meaning. In the evenings, when we sat in the living room, the silence between us spoke louder than any words could. I caught myself stealing glances at him, wondering if he was doing the same when I wasn't looking. The tension became a constant presence, something that followed me even when I was alone. I started noticing how the rest of the world seemed to fade when he was around. Friends would call, inviting me out, but I would find excuses to stay home. I told myself it was because I was tired, but the truth was I didn't want to miss a moment with him. He had become the center of my world without me even realizing it. And yet, the conflict tore at me. Was this fair? Was I mistaking companionship for something deeper? Or was I stepping into a storm I couldn't escape once it started? There were subtle shifts in him too. He started taking more responsibility around the house, almost like he wanted to prove something to me. He'd fix things that had been broken for months, carry groceries in without being asked, even cook dinner some nights. On the surface, it looked like kindness, but underneath, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was trying to carve a place in my life beyond the role he already had. Each time he did something thoughtful, I felt both grateful and uneasy, because it deepened the bond we were trying so hard not to acknowledge. One evening, we had guests over, family friends who hadn't seen us in months. They joked about how grown up he had become, how mature he looked sitting at the head of the table. I laughed along, but the comments stirred something inside me. I realized other people could see the changes too. And when his eyes met mine across the table, the spark between us felt undeniable. It was as if everyone in the room disappeared for a heartbeat, leaving only the two of us caught in a moment that no one else could understand. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, he came to sit beside me on the porch. The moonlight made everything softer, almost dreamlike. We talked about ordinary things, work, plans, the future, but underneath the conversation was a current pulling us closer. When he leaned back in his chair and looked at me, there was a silence heavy with questions neither of us could ask. My heart pounded because I knew if he reached out in that moment, I wouldn't have been able to stop him. But he didn't. He just smiled, a smile that left me both relieved and restless. That push and pull became the rhythm of our days. Close enough to feel the pull, far enough to pretend nothing was happening. The suspense was its own kind of torment. I found myself questioning everything. Was I brave enough to admit what I felt, or cowardly enough to keep pretending it didn't exist? And what about him? Was he struggling with the same thoughts, or was I carrying this weight alone? The nights grew heavier with silence, and every small moment seemed to carry a hidden meaning. I could feel the distance between us shrinking, like two magnets being pulled together no matter how hard I tried to resist. It wasn't just in the stolen glances anymore, it was in the air, in the way my heart raced when I heard his footsteps down the hall, in the way he lingered just long enough to make me wonder if he was waiting for me to say something I couldn't bring myself to say. One evening, the storm outside matched the storm inside me. Rain pounded against the windows, and the electricity flickered in the house. The two of us were left sitting in the dim light, the world outside swallowed by thunder and darkness. He poured us both a glass of wine, and for a long time we didn't speak. The silence felt heavier than any words, and I knew something was about to shift. Every second stretched out endlessly, filled with the tension of everything unsaid. He leaned closer, his voice low as he asked about my day, but it wasn't the question that mattered, it was the way his eyes stayed on mine, steady and unflinching. I tried to look away, tried to focus on the storm, but the pull was too strong. My breath caught, and for a moment it felt like the air between us disappeared completely. I could feel the choice hanging in the balance, as if one small move would push us past a point we could never return from. The storm raged louder, a crash of thunder shaking the walls, and it felt like the world itself was echoing what was happening inside the room. He reached out, almost instinctively, his hand brushing mine. It was such a small gesture, but it set my whole body on edge. I should have pulled away. I should have said something to break the spell. Instead, I froze, caught in the moment, torn between fear and desire. Every memory of the past weeks came rushing back, the late-night talks, the laughter, the unspoken promises hidden in each glance. They all collided in that instant, leaving me with one overwhelming realization. The line I had been guarding so carefully was about to vanish. But just before anything could happen, I pulled in a shaky breath, my mind spinning. The storm outside gave us cover, but it also mirrored the chaos inside me. My heart pounded so hard it felt like he could hear it. He didn't say a word, and neither did I. The suspense of that silence became unbearable, and I knew the moment of truth was closing in fast. The story doesn't end here. It only deepens. What would you do if you were standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything? Would you step back, or would you let yourself fall? Tell me what you think in the comments, because the next moment is the one that will decide everything. The storm eventually passed, but the silence between us did not. The following days carried an uneasy calm, like the eye of a hurricane. We went about our routines as if nothing had happened, yet every glance, every shared moment, carried the memory of that night. It felt as though we were standing on opposite sides of a doorway, waiting to see who would be the first to step through. And just when I thought I had a grip on the situation, life threw something at us that made the line between us blur even further. One afternoon, I got a call from my ex-husband. He wanted to visit, to reconnect with his son, and maybe even test the waters of reconciling with me. The request caught me completely off guard. I hadn't spoken to him in months, and the idea of him stepping back into our lives felt like opening a wound I'd worked hard to heal. But I couldn't say no, not without raising questions. So I agreed. When I told my stepson, his expression shifted. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't just warmth, it was possessiveness, maybe even jealousy. He didn't say much, only nodded, but the air between us thickened. That night, he was unusually quiet, barely touching his dinner, his thoughts obviously elsewhere. And in that silence, I realized something important. It wasn't just me feeling the pull anymore. He was caught in it too. The visit added a new layer of tension to everything. My ex-husband showed up, full of charm and nostalgia, acting as if time hadn't changed a thing. He laughed at old memories, made subtle comments about family, and hinted that maybe we could find our way back to what we once had. On the surface, it seemed harmless, but beneath it all I felt trapped between two worlds, the past that no longer fit and the forbidden present that was pulling me closer every day. My stepson barely hid his irritation. He stayed close to me during the visit, inserting himself into conversations, almost as if he was staking his claim without words. I noticed it, and I'm sure my ex-husband did too, though he never mentioned it. The entire time, my heart pounded with the weight of secrets, with the fear that someone would see through the careful mask I was trying to wear. Later, when the house was quiet again, he confronted me. His voice was calm, but underneath it I could hear the storm. He asked why I had let his father back into the picture, why I would even consider entertaining the idea of reconciliation when things had been broken for so long. His words weren't just questions, they were confessions hidden in plain sight. I could hear the emotion he was holding back, and it scared me just as much as it thrilled me. That was the twist I hadn't expected, not just my own conflict, but his. It wasn't only me wrestling with boundaries, loneliness, and temptation, he was too. And the more I realized that, the higher the stakes became. Because this wasn't a game anymore. This was two people standing at the edge of something dangerous, and the presence of his father only made the pull stronger. What would happen if the truth came out? What would it mean if the feelings we both tried to hide finally surfaced? The story was no longer just about me crossing a line. It was about him too, about us both being swept into something neither of us could control. And that's where the suspense deepens. Have you ever been caught between the life you thought you knew and the one your heart secretly wanted? If you were in my place, would you fight the temptation harder or let it take you where it wants to go? Share your thoughts in the comments, because this is where the story begins to spiral towards something neither of us could have prepared for. The night everything came to a head, the house felt charged again, almost the way it had during the storm. My ex-husband had left after another long visit filled with his promises of starting fresh, but instead of feeling hopeful, I only felt torn. I knew the past wasn't where I belonged, yet I wasn't sure if the future I was inching toward made any sense either. The moment the door closed behind him, I felt my stepson watching me, and I couldn't avoid the truth any longer. We ended up in the living room, the silence between us stretching thin until it finally broke. He asked me outright if I still had feelings for his father. The question hung heavy in the air, and I could see in his eyes that he already knew the answer. I told him no, that whatever I once felt was gone. But before I could stop myself, I admitted that what scared me wasn't my ex-husband returning, it was the feelings growing between the two of us. Saying it out loud felt like breaking through a wall I had been hiding behind for weeks. The confession shifted everything. He stepped closer, his face searching mine for hesitation, and for the first time, neither of us tried to look away. The tension that had been building finally reached its peak. My heart raced as the distance closed, every choice we had been avoiding now staring us in the face. It was the climax of everything, the quiet nights, the stolen glances, the storm that mirrored our emotions. We had crossed the line we swore we wouldn't, and there was no pretending anymore. But just when it felt like everything was about to unravel, the twist came. My phone buzzed with a message that shattered the fragile moment. It was from my ex-husband, a simple line that read, "I know what's going on." My stomach dropped, and the world tilted. Somehow, he had seen through the masks, through the careful silences and guarded words. Maybe it was the way his son stayed close, maybe it was the tension in my own eyes, but he knew. The intensity of that moment was unlike anything I'd ever felt. On one hand, the truth was finally out between us, and the weight of denial was gone. On the other, the secret we had guarded so carefully was no longer safe. The climax wasn't just about us admitting what we felt, it was about realizing that everything was about to change, whether we were ready or not. When I read that message, "I know what's going on," my whole body froze. The words lit up on my phone screen like a warning I'd been dreading from the very beginning. For a long moment, neither of us moved. My stepson just stared at me, his face pale, his jaw tense, and I could see the same fear in his eyes that was rising in my chest. We had tried to keep everything hidden, tucked away in late-night silences and careful glances, but secrets always find a way to the surface. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. My ex-husband didn't show up or call again, but the silence from him was its own kind of message. I kept waiting for the fallout, waiting for confrontation, but it never came. And in that quiet, I realized something important. His knowing didn't change what had already happened between us. The truth had been spoken, and once it's out, you can't take it back. My stepson and I had a choice to make. We could either let the fear of judgment and consequences tear us apart, or we could face the reality of what we felt and decide where to go from there. We spent hours talking, real conversations, not the half-truths or unspoken glances we'd relied on before. We talked about the risks, the pain it might cause, and the fact that some lines are drawn for a reason. But we also talked about the connection that had grown naturally between us, one we couldn't deny any longer. In the end, the resolution wasn't about choosing passion over reason or reason over passion. It was about honesty. We decided that whatever future we built had to be based on truth, not secrecy. That meant setting boundaries, taking things slowly, and accepting that the story wasn't just about desire, it was about two people finding a way to heal from loneliness, even if it meant walking through fire to get there. The final twist wasn't the message on my phone, or even the moment of confession. It was the realization that what we both needed most wasn't escape, but clarity. We chose not to hide anymore, but also not to rush into something that could destroy us. It was messy, complicated, and far from perfect, but it was real. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for in life, something real in a world full of masks. Looking back, the story isn't just about crossing lines or forbidden feelings. It's about the choices we make when we're torn between what's expected and what our hearts are screaming for. It's about the courage to face the truth, even when it terrifies us. And maybe, just maybe, it's about understanding that love, no matter how complicated, has a way of forcing us to grow. So I'll leave you with this. Would you have chosen the same path, or would you have walked away before it ever began? Let me know in the comments, and tell me if you'd like to see a sequel to this story, because sometimes endings are only the beginning of something new. Summary: this is the story of a woman torn between loneliness and temptation, caught in a growing connection with her adult stepson. What begins as innocent conversations turns into something much deeper, forcing both of them to confront their feelings, the return of her ex-husband, and the truth they can no longer hide. It's a story about boundaries, romance, conflict, and the courage to face reality, even when it's uncomfortable. 4.